Hello, my name is Christian Swenson. I do videos here on YouTube about autism, autistic consciousness, and life on the autism spectrum. Now, a number of you have been wondering about Christian's Christianity, or more broadly about what I believe, what I think, what I hold to, how I live my life. And I want to give a kind of indirect answer to that. It's not an easy question to answer. I am a Christian. I'm what you call a Latter-day Saint or a Mormon, but I'm not a very good one. You'll see what I mean as I go throughout. I'm very eclectic. In many ways, I'm very inconsistent. But to quote Emerson, consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you 11 books that have changed my life. And these 11 books should give you an idea of the kind of philosophical, intellectual, religious person I am. I'm going to begin with this book that I no longer have a physical copy of because I used to buy a lot of physical copies and give them to people, and now I don't have any, and now they're super expensive to get. It's called Making the Gods Work for You by Caroline Casey. She is an astrologer, but this book doesn't really take astrology seriously. It doesn't take it not seriously, it takes it playfully. One of the things she says in the book is that believe nothing. Entertain possibilities, because as soon as we believe something, we've given our authority away. That basically reflects my reaction to any belief, is that beliefs are something I entertain. They're something that I treat playfully, and this is any belief, science, religion, anything. I think it's abdicating my own authority to give away my belief to something else. Now, for each of these, I'm going to read you a brief passage, and some of them, maybe most of them, will have something to do with autism. Probably not most of them, but here's the one for Making the Gods Work for You, in the chapter about Saturn. The initiatory ordeal is by definition a solitary experience that leads us to self-reflection. Solitude, Saturn's sacramental activity, is the portal to the magical realm where power larger than us resides. Very often when we are alone, we feel most connected to everything. Time spent alone allows us to consider our lives, to align the inner gods with the outer gods of the cosmos. That's what consider means. It means to align with the stars. You should look it up. To disentangle ourselves from the phantasmagoria of seductive distractions. Rather than helping us fend off loneliness, Saturn encourages us to embrace it. We live in an anti-reflective culture, where much of what passes for entertainment is merely a distraction from the terror of being alone. We manufacture pandemonium, which originally meant making a lot of noise in order to drive away the scary parts of our psyche, our demons, like pandemonium. But partying will not cure loneliness. Solitude is the cure for loneliness. Like cures like. Saturn teaches that the initiatory ordeal of pushing through dread precedes self-possession. The spiritual traditions of many cultures require a time of arduous solitude as a necessary prerequisite to self-knowledge. I once spent a week alone in a Tibetan retreat cabin, fasting on nothing but roasted barley tea. Even though I was on a Zen meditation retreat, the cabin had been borrowed from the Tibetans. Each night I was visited by remarkably vivid Tibetan demons. I accounted for this, that the previous solitary inhabitants had been skilled in the remarkable Tibetan Buddhist discipline of potent imagining. I had inadvertently borrowed their residual demons as a means to experience my fears. By the end of the week, and here's something interesting, I found myself rocking back and forth in a manner I had only previously associated with mental patients, who may very well be unconsciously practicing traditional spiritual disciplines without a context of guidance and meaning. Upon subsequent reflection, I understood that I have traveled way out there, and that the rocking was a way of rocking myself back into the rhythmic embrace of the cosmos. In both of my initiatory ordeals, if I had not leaned into my fear, or left the cabin in the middle of the week, I would have felt disappointed and crazed. So there you go. That's Making the Gods Work for You by Caroline Casey. The next one is a fiction book. You may have heard of it. It's called The Hero of Ages, kind of a stand-in for the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson is an author who lives around where I live. I've been to classes by him. I've met him. And I just wanted to read a spoiler laden, so get out of here if you don't want to have something spoiled from the very end of the Mistborn trilogy. It describes what happens when Sazed, I think that's how you pronounce it, a main character in this book who is a curator of religions. That's kind of what I am. A curator of belief systems. When he becomes God, that's really what happens. The curator of religions becomes God. And I really identify with Sazed because this really demonstrates to me the logic to what I was saying about belief. There is something helpful that can come out of it. And so he's been given the power of deity. And this is what happens. And in a moment of transcendence, he understood it all. He saw the patterns, the clues, the secret. Men had believed and worshipped for as long as they had existed, and within those beliefs, Sazed found the answers he needed. Gems, hidden from ruin in all the religions of mankind. There had been people called the Bennett. They had considered map-making to be a solemn duty. Sazed had once preached their religion to Kelsier himself. From their detailed maps and charts, Sazed rediscovered how the world had once looked. He used his powers to restore the continents and oceans, the islands and coastlines, the mountains and rivers. There had been a people known as the Nelazan. They had worshipped the stars, had called them the 1,000 eyes of their god Trell watching them. Sazed remembered well offering the religion to the young Vin while she had sat, captive, undergoing her first haircut with the crew. From the Nelazan, the keepers had recovered star charts and had dutifully recorded them, even though the scholars had called them useless since they hadn't been accurate since the days before the Ascension. Yet from these star charts and from the patterns and movements of the other planets in the solar system they outlined, Sazed could determine exactly where the world was supposed to sit in orbit. He put the planet back into its place, not pushing too hard as the Lord Ruler once had, for he had a frame of reference by which to measure. There had been a people known as the Kanzi who would worship death. They had provided detailed notes about the human body. Sazed had offered one of their prayers over the bodies they had found in Vin's old crew hideout back when Kelsier still lived. From the Kanzi's teachings about the body, Sazed determined that the physiology of mankind had changed, either by the Lord Ruler's intention or by simple evolution, to adapt to breathing ash and eating brown plants. In a wave of power, Sazed restored the bodies of man to the way they had been before, leaving each person the same, yet fixing the problems that living for 1,000 years on a dying world had caused. He didn't destroy men, warping and twisting them as the Lord Ruler had when he'd created the Kandra, for Sazed had a guide by which to work. He learned other things too, dozens of secrets. One religion worshipped animals, and from it Sazed drew forth pictures, explanations, and references regarding the life that should have lived on the earth. He restored it. From another, Dadrada, the religion he had preached to clubs before the man died, Sazed learned about colors and hues. It was the last religion Sazed had ever taught. With its poems about color and nature, he could restore the plants, sky, and landscape to the way they had once been. Every religion had clues in it, for the faiths of men contained the hopes, loves, wishes, and lives of the people who had contained them. Finally, Sazed took the religion of the Larsta, the religion that Kelsier's wife, Mare, had believed in. Its priests had composed poetry during their times of meditation. From these poems, and from a scrap of paper that Mare had given to Kelsier, who had given it to Vin, who had given it to Sazed, he learned of the beautiful things that the world had once held, and he restored flowers to the plants that had once borne them. The religions in my portfolio weren't useless after all, he thought, the power flowing from him and remaking the world. None of them were. They weren't all true, but they all had truth. Makes me want to cry. So that's Mistborn. The next one is Feeling Good. This book is something I give to my students in the ethics class that I teach. I'll give them passages from this book. This book has been demonstrated in several studies. There's even been meta-studies done to be as effective in treating depression as medication. Read this book, do what it suggests, and your depression will likely improve. And I just wanted to share a little bit with you from the chapter about perfectionism. It's a much shorter passage. Some of these will be longer than others. I dare you to try to be average. Does the prospect seem blah and boring? Very well. I dare you to try it for just one day. Will you accept the challenge? If you agree, I predict two things will happen. First, you won't be particularly successful at being average. Second, in spite of this, you will receive substantial satisfaction from what you do. More than usual. And if you try to keep this averageness up, I suspect your satisfaction will magnify and turn to joy. That's what this chapter is all about. Learning to defeat perfectionism and enjoy the spoils of pure joy. You should get the book. The next one is a book by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I've taught this to about 10 classes in my ethic class and my world literature class. It's Notes from the Underground. This book is one of the most powerful explorations of psychology I've ever read. It explores the psychology of the loner, of the one who resents, of the arrogant person, but also the broken person. In the middle of that, it also has a very powerful exploration of the limits of reason and the limits of utopianism. It's really good, and I wanted to just read to you a little passage. It says, "What does reason know? Reason knows only what it has managed to learn. Some things perhaps it will never learn. This is no consolation, but why not say it anyway? Well, human nature acts as an entire whole, with everything that is in it, consciously and unconsciously, and through it lies, and though it lies, still it lives." And so what he's saying is that reason is only a part of human nature, but the whole is bigger than reason. That's Dostoevsky. It makes me cry when I read certain parts, but you need the context. The next one's another fiction book. It's called Vollis by Philip K. Dick. It's a science fiction novel by a master of science fiction. But this book is remarkably special to me, and for reasons that probably defy belief. What Jung would call a synchronicity happened with this book. This book is only half fiction. The book describes Philip K. Dick's paranormal experiences, his mystical experiences. What happened was he saw a beam of pink light that struck him and gave him like supernatural information. And what happened is that he was told through this beam of pink light that his son had a very specific illness. And he went to the doctor about it. Described it. They didn't believe him. They checked. He did, and he saved his life. This actually happened. You can look it up. But what happens in this book is kind of weird. He goes to a movie called Vollis, and he receives a message from the same beam of pink light, and it teaches him something about what he needs to go do. Like a secret message is in this movie, right? The message has something to do with trends. It's a very Gnostic book, if you know anything about Gnosticism. It's the idea that we're trapped in this world as a prison, and we are liberated from this prison by knowledge, something like that, like the beam of pink light. But what ends up happening is he follows this trail. A secret message in a movie, right? And let me say this. I was on one of my many trips to Sweden before I married my wife. I was listening to this book on the way at 3 times speed because I thought I could do that. I really couldn't. And when I got there to Sweden, what we did was we watched an episode of the TV show Lost. We were watching it together at the time. And in the 8th episode of the 4th season, which was one of the first we watched when we were there, called Eggtown, you can look it up just right at the beginning, what happens is that the character John Locke pulls a book off the shelf. It's Vollis. It's not this edition, but it's Vollis. And he brings it down to a character called Ben, who at this point in the series is his prisoner in his own house. And he says, as he gives him breakfast and the books, he says, "Oh, I've already read this book." And John Locke says the most interesting and provocative thing. "Maybe you'll catch something you didn't the first time around." To me, that felt like a slap in the face. Remember, a secret message in a movie telling me that I didn't understand the book I thought I did. You know, it's just in a way like this book does. The boundaries between fiction and nonfiction blurred. I don't know if that's a real thing, but it certainly felt like it at the time, a masterful synchronicity in Jung's sense of the word, and so I did. I did read it much more slowly, and there was a lot that I missed. Philip K. Dick is one of my wife's favorite authors. She introduced me to him, and I'm looking at going into a PhD program, applying at least to, funnily enough, a guy who, among other things, studies Philip K. Dick. So it's Philip K. Dick. The next one is Intuitive Thinking as a Spiritual Path, or originally titled A Philosophy of Freedom, by Rudolf Steiner. He was a spiritual teacher, esotericist from the early 20th century. I'm a huge fan. I don't believe everything he believes, but the way he thinks, the way he articulates and connects his thought is unlike anyone I've ever seen. He's the founder of Waldorf schools, if you know about those. For a while, because I'm such a big fan, I was actually on the executive board of a Waldorf elementary school around here, and that was one of the best experiences I've ever had. I actually helped get that school started. Let me read to you this passage. The difficulty of grasping thinking in its essence by observing it consists in this. When the soul wants to bring it, i.e. thinking, into the focus of attention, the essence of thinking has all too easily already slipped away from the observing soul. All that is left for the soul, then, is dead abstraction, the corpse of living thinking. If we look only at this abstraction, we can easily feel drawn to the mysticism of feeling or the metaphysics of will, which seems so full of life. We find it strange if anyone seeks to grasp the essence of reality in mere thoughts. But whoever truly manages to experience life within thinking sees that dwelling in mere feeling or contemplating the element of will cannot even be compared with, let alone ranked above, the inner richness and the experience, the inner calmness and mobility in the life of thinking. It is precisely the richness, the inner fullness of experience that makes its reflection in normal consciousness seem dead and abstract. No other activity of the human soul is as easily misunderstood as thinking. Feeling and willing warm the human soul even when we look back and recollect their original state, while thinking all too easily leaves us cold. It seems to dry out the life of the soul, yet this is only the sharply contoured shadow of the reality of thinking, a reality interwoven with light, dipping down warmly into the phenomena of the world. This dipping down occurs with a power that flows forth in the activity of thinking itself, the power of love in spiritual form. One should not object that to speak of love in active thinking is to displace a feeling, love, into thinking. The objection is actually a confirmation of what is being said here. For whoever turns toward essential thinking finds within it both feeling and will, and both of these in the depths of their reality. Whoever turns aside from thinking, turn toward pure feeling and willing, loses the true reality of feeling and willing. If we experience thinking intuitively, we also do justice to the experience of feeling and will. But the mysticism of feeling and the metaphysics of will cannot do justice to the penetration of existence by intuitive thinking. Those views all too easily conclude that it is they who stand within reality, while intuitive thinkers, devoid of feeling and estranged from reality, form only a shadowy, cold picture of the world in abstract thoughts. What this book does is it trains your mind to think without pictures or words. It trains you to think silently, in pure ideas, pure thinking that is permeated with love. And I've experienced this. This is the most amazing book ever. It's the book Steiner said, despite all of his occultism that came later, would be the most important book he ever read and the only one of lasting value. The next one is a book I've referenced a few times, Plant Intelligence and the Imaginal Realm, Into the Dreaming of Earth by Stephen Herod Buhner. This is a book that's dear to me. It's a book that describes how, despite what Steiner says, that there is a communication you can experience from the world through feeling, through the meanings in sensation, and through the feelings in those meanings, and the meanings those feelings contain, you can communicate with the dreaming of the planet. It's actually really rigorous in the first part. Talks about sensory gating channels and about what happens when certain senses are more open and more closed, right? Talks about hallucinogens, talks about bacteria, and he makes the claim that every organism is intelligent. And of course it is, because it needs to navigate what it takes in, what it leaves out, where it goes and where it doesn't. Of course that needs intelligence. It needs to be self-aware, because it has a self, it has a boundary. And I think it's stupid that we think that the only animals that are intelligent are us, you know? Well, we're intelligent, but you know, we're not. I mean, we are, but so is the plant, so to speak. I hope you can hear me. I hope the sound is good enough, because I just realized I don't have my lav mic on. Let me put it on. Hopefully that was good enough the first 20 minutes. But let me read to you this part here. The Secretkinesis of the world. The feeling dimension of the world is not easily describable in words, but it's deeply important, especially if you want to touch the dreaming of Earth. Unfortunately, in the West, the feeling sense is not only atrophied, very few people even know that it is a primary sensory modality. As Bradford Keeney relates in a conversation with the Kalahari Bushmen, it is incredibly difficult to convey its importance or its reality to people in the West. Here's the quote. I reply as I have before. The difficulty, my dear friend, concerns how to say it. The rest of the world does not yet accept that a feeling is as real as a tree or a rock. Or a lion, she adds. Are they emotionally blind? Do they keep bumping into feelings and emotions they don't know what to do with? I bet they keep telling their hearts to go back to sleep. The truth is, here's Buhner again, every physical object you see has a distinctly different feeling aspect than every other object you will encounter. The object's visual inputs, auditory inputs, olfactory inputs all have a unique feeling dimensions to them. And every one of them, just as with different musical notes, has a slightly different feeling or emotional tone to it than the one before or after it. The developed use of this feeling dimension of things, the Secretkinesis of physical objects, that is the key to opening the sensory gating channels more widely. It's one of the innate mechanisms of hallucinogens, neurognostics of any sort. They usually make people feel very good. They restore the feeling sense and enhance it. They open the gating channels of the feeling sense more widely, so you can feel the impact of the world, its non-kinesthetic touch upon you, while at the same time enhancing the pleasure centers of the brain. They stimulate the reclamation of the feeling sense and subsequently access to the metaphysical background of the world. This is the reason they are illegal. Reclaiming the feeling sense and developing it as a primary sensory sensing tool is one of the main ways to begin to enter more deeply into the metaphysical background of the world. So there you go. That's plant intelligence in the imaginal realm. Next one you may have heard of. It's called The Red Book by Carl Jung. This is a result of what people might call a psychosis that Jung experienced after his breakup with Freud, right before World War I started. He started having hallucinations, started having waking visions of a catastrophe, a flood submerging all of Europe, and he thought he was going crazy. He was an Orthodox Freud, or a semi-Orthodox Freudian, and but he did the most responsible thing a psychologist could do, was to, instead of falling into insanity, dive into it and record everything that happened. And this is what he recorded. And turns out when World War I happened the next year, he's like, oh, this wasn't my personal psychosis, this was a collective psychosis. And I was experiencing the unconscious forces in the collective. And actually turns out this wasn't an uncommon thing in 1913. Lots of artists, Kandinsky was one of them. There were others who described a catastrophe about to happen. Apocalypse and prophecy were in the air in 1913. I could give you lots of examples. Ludwig Meidner, he painted paintings that look like World War I, bombings, artillery, in 1913, which was before the war happened. Lots of things, right? But here is my quote. The symbol is the word that goes out of the mouth, that one does not simply speak, but that rises out of the depths of the self as a word of power and great need, and places itself unexpectedly on the tongue. It is an astonishing and perhaps seemingly irrational word, but one recognizes it as a symbol, since it is alien to the conscious mind. If one accepts the symbol, it is as if a door opens leading into a new room whose existence one previously did not know. But if one does not accept the symbol, it is as if one carelessly went past this door, and since this was the only door leading to the inner chambers, one must pass outside into the streets again, exposed to everything external. But the soul suffers great need, since outer freedom is of no use to it. Salvation is a long road that leads through many gates. These gates are symbols. Each gate is at first invisible. Indeed, it seems at first that it must be created, for it exists only if one has dug up the spring's root, the symbol. In the morning, when the new sun rises, the word steps out of my mouth, but it is murdered lovelessly, since I did not know that it was the Savior. The God appears in multiple guises, for when he emerges, he has assumed some of the character of the night in the nightly waters in which he slumbered, and in which he struggled for renewal in the last hour of the night. So that's Jung's Red Book. Next one is a book by Donna Williams. I've referenced her before, but not in this book. It's called Exposure Anxiety, The Invisible Cage, an exploration of the self-protection responses in the autism spectrum and beyond. What she describes is a kind of, I can maybe best illustrate by a gesture. It's kind of like, it's the feeling of, of defending yourself against overwhelming sensation and building up walls against the world because the world's too scary. And what ends up happening is that these walls become a prison, but also a parent, right? They feel like they're protecting you, but they're also starving you. And I just want to read her description of it. Exposure anxiety is a self-parenting survival mechanism, as intense, often tick-like, involuntary self-protection mechanism that jumps in to defend against sensed invasion. When it becomes chronic, it is self-perpetuating, like a boulder hurtling down a hill, gaining momentum. Chronic, uncontrolled, acute exposure anxiety is about addiction to your own adrenaline. We all experience stress, and some of us are more driven, more passionate, more fixated and intense, more independent, more controlling, more dominant or passive, more jumpy or aloof, naturally. In most cases, where exposure anxiety goes hand in hand with the metabolic, digestive, and immune system disorders that co-occur in the largest percentage of people on the autism spectrum. The chronic stress of exposure anxiety exacerbates physiological problems, which then affect information processing as well as throw off neurotransmitter balance into a state of chaos, forming a self-perpetuating loop. The person with exposure anxiety who lives and works with those who do not understand the condition are bound to find the self in relation to other, directly confrontational approach of the environment seems to make exposure anxiety worse. This cycle can be broken. And then she says that exposure anxiety has two faces and is the heaven and the hell, the lure of sanctuary and the suffocation of the prison. She describes how exposure anxiety makes it difficult to dare expressive volume in a directly confrontational self in relation to other world. She describes how exposure anxiety is about feeling your own existence too close up, too in your own face. So there you go. That's Donna Williams' Exposure Anxiety. The next one is just the collected works of James Hillman. He's a Jungian psychologist. I reference Carl Jung, but he takes Jung in a different direction. He is deep and poetic and soulful and explores the meanings in things in ways I've not seen before. It's basically poetry. And I decided to read from his book, Animal Presences, a book about animals and the hidden meanings in animals and the meanings of animal dreams. He does it in a very interesting way. But here we go. The phonetic link between play and display suggests that the animal's urge to self-revelation is reason enough for its creation. This is precisely the help it offers Adam in the Bible story. The animal continually reminds that the play of creation is revelation. To be is to be seen. Beauty is given with existence. As Portman shows, To be seen is as genetic as to see. The organic structures of patterning, coloring, and symmetrical display are as genetic as the ocular organs that allow seeing the display. In fact, the coat is genetically prior to the eye that sees the coat. It is this beauty of the phenomenal and its everlasting return of the same that the animals reveal, as if they revel in their own fantasy. He doesn't mean that in a negative sense. He uses fantasy in a very positive sense. Not information, not communication, not metaphor. Beyond understanding and meaning, the beauty of these amazingly complicated and other living beings. It is as if they say, look at us with respect. Respect, which means look again. As if Adam's eyes were made to see their images, or to see them as archetypal images. Inside the ark, like Noah's Ark, that story, it was dark, of course, for the ark was covered with pitch inside and out. By what light, then, did the creatures see? What is the vision of these seeds in the ark, the essential vision? Jewish legend says that God sent the archangel Raphael to Noah with a book of wisdom in which were written all the secrets and the mysteries. By means of this book, Noah knew how to fulfill his task and gather the animals. With him into the ark, he took this book, and it was made of sapphires, and by means of its light, all the creatures in the ark could see. He describes how the incorruptible substance of the chylum, which means heaven in alchemical language, but it means something else, is the light by which the corruptible animals see. The natural animals have an imaginal vision. The physical world perceives by a metaphysical light. To restore to our human eye that sapphire light, we must be pressed in among the animals against the pitch wall. The way to the imaginal lies in the animal. He describes how the eye that sees by a sapphire vision is brought by the animal in the dream. The blue vision is inside the pig, and we must get inside the pig for the sake of its sapphire light. Interiorization is not them in us, but we with them inside the ark. It's just beautiful language and not the images you would think, but that's what I love him about. And then the next one, the last one, number 11, is probably the most influential book that I've ever read. Save the best for last, and also the biggest for last. That's probably the actual reason it's last, is Heaven and Hell by Emanuel Swedenborg. This, even though I'm a Latter-day Saint, a Mormon, Swedenborg's articulation of a world beyond this one best reflects my belief. He uncannily describes patterns that often happen in near-death experiences. There have been paranormal experiences he had in his life, like the one where he knew a fire was happening in Stockholm exactly when it was happening, as it was happening. He was describing what was happening on the other side of Sweden. I know Sweden, you can't see smoke from Göteborg when you're in, you can't see smoke from Stockholm when you're in Göteborg. It just doesn't work. Biographers of Swedenborg, skeptical, atheistical ones, they're like, I don't know what to do with this, so we're just going to skip over it. Because there were like 17 witnesses. They all say the same thing. But let me read to you this part about space in heaven. And also I think it's very interesting because people on hallucinogens tend to see worlds that work by the same logic that his world works. Even though everything in heaven appears to be located in space, just like the things in our world, still angels have no notion or concept of location and space. Since this can only seem like a paradox, and since it is highly significant, I should like to shed some light on it. All motion in the spiritual world is the effect of changes of inner states, to the point that motion there is nothing but changes of state. This is how I have been led by the Lord into the heavens. This also happened to my spirit while my body remained in the same place. This is how all angels move about, which means that they do not have distances, and if they do not have distances, they do not have space. Instead, they have states and their changes. He describes how whenever people move from one place to another, whether it is within their town, in their courtyards, in their gardens, or to people outside their own community, they get there more quickly if they are eager to, and more slowly if they are not. The path is lengthened in the spiritual world, or shortened, depending on their desire, even though it is the same path. I have often seen this, much to my surprise. We can see from all this again that distance and space itself depend wholly on the inner state of angels. And since this is the case, no notion or concept of space can enter their minds, even though they have space just the way we do in our world. We can illustrate this by our own thoughts, which are also devoid of space. For whatever we focus on intently in our thought is seemingly present. Then, too, anyone who reflects on it realizes that our eyesight registers space only through the intermediate objects on Earth that we see at the same time, or from our knowing from experience that things are a certain distance away. There you go. The essential first cause of all this, he says, is that the Lord is present to each individual according to that individual's love and faith. In other words, their reception of love or truth. And that everything looks near or remote depending on his presence, since this is what defines everything that exists in the heavens. That's a really deep thought. It's worth thinking about. This is what gives angels wisdom, since it provides them with an outreach of thoughts, which in turn affords them communication with everyone in the heavens. In a word, this is what enables them to think spiritually and not naturally, the way we do. Swedenborg has, in many ways, defined my life. He's helped me think and articulate in ways that most people can't. Swedenborg is the language and the software of my being in many ways. So, this is a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. I hope it works. I might make an abbreviated version, especially if there's no sound in the first half, but I think there is. I'm going to do 2 more videos this week. I'm filming them right now. I think I'm going to do a video about Kandinsky. He's the guy I referenced, the painter. I think he was autistic. Kind of show you the painting I have of his, not a real painting, just a copy, and talk about his synesthesia. And then the last one will be an EDC, an everyday carry, what's in my pockets kind of situation, and I think you'll find that entertaining. So my name's Christian Swenson. Like, subscribe, comment, but don't comment nasty things, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.